Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ashram Talks. This is Atul Krishnadas, and I am your host for today. So, in previous episodes, we were talking about karma yoga and how it's so important in our lives to live with awareness that we are an eternal soul and not this body. So, every task that we do in our daily lives become an offering to Krishna, to God, and therefore becomes meaningful and our lives is fuller. But now that's knowledge that we know. And today Simon is going to introduce us the topic about wisdom. What is the difference between wisdom and knowledge, and how we can pray for wisdom in order to enrich our lives, in order to practice karma yoga, in order to have a more meaningful existence in this world. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you so much, Atul Krishnadas. I am very happy to be here and to join you today.
Thank you so much.
So, today we're looking at verses 52 and 53 of chapter 2. And this episode is entitled Why Wisdom Disappears in Hard Times and How to Keep It. And that's a topic that's closely connected to the two verses that we'll be looking at in some detail. So I want to first begin with like an anecdote, personal anecdote. I had the good fortune to study directly with an elderly teacher, a master practitioner in the Bhakti tradition, who was close to 90 years old. And I lived and traveled with him for many years. And during my training, I memorized a large number of verses, actually thousands of verses from the sacred texts and poetry of India. And in the morning, my teacher would have me and other students recite the Sanskrit verses that we had learned the previous day and explain their meanings. And then he would correct mistakes, and he himself would elucidate the deeper meaning of these sacred verses. But so one morning, my teacher turned to me and asked, "Can you tell me the reason why I request you to memorize these verses?" And his gaze was like piercing. It felt very much like he could look into the deepest corners of my soul. And I was caught off guard just by the simplicity of the question itself. So to, to buy a moment, I asked, "Do you mean this particular verse? The one that we were learning that particular day?" And his response was, "Well, I give you so many verses to memorize. Why?" So I thought about it and quickly came up with an answer so that we can have proper understanding and grounding in the principles of truth. And I thought that sounded a sophisticated enough reply. And another student suggested, so that we can understand where we are in our practice. And then my teacher explained, the reason I ask you to learn these verses is so that you will perfectly practice them in your life. And at that time, the fruit of learning will manifest. Remembering alone will not suffice. Whatever you memorize, try to practice it in your life. Well, my teacher understood that I was trapped in the realm of concepts, and I could ponder truths all my life and even explain them. But until I was actually applying them in my everyday life, they would be as good as useless to me. In other words, after understanding the teachings of the sacred texts intellectually, I would need to breathe life into them. And to do this, I would need to embody them in my life. So my teacher then told us a story of a great mentor named Drona. I thought I would share this because Drona is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. If any of you have been following from chapter 1, Duryodhana mentions Drona. And Drona was the martial teacher of both Arjuna and the Pandavas, and also the other army, the Kauravas, in other words, Duryodhana and his brothers. He was their teacher in trained them to be great warriors. So Drona gave all of his warrior students. So this is when Arjuna and Duryodhana were very young. And in his school, Drona asked them, he gave them a lesson consisting of a single statement, always speak truth. And the following day, Drona asked his students if they had retained the lesson. So, um, yes, I've memorized it. I've learned it, they declared, each one by one. But Yudhishthira, destined to become a great Dharma king, he remained silent. And eventually he said, no, I have not retained the lesson. And so Drona turned to Yudhishthira and asked why that was. And Yudhishthira replied, I've not yet made the lesson part of my character. When I do this, then it can be said that I've retained it. Drona was immensely pleased. He told all of his students that in uttering truth, just then in uttering truth, Yudhishthira had actually demonstrated that he had indeed retained the lesson, whilst the others had not. So the sacred verses that I had learned, they hold immense potency. They're like, you can say, magical arrows, divine weapons. And I'd collected a large number of these in my quiver. But these weapons, these shafts, would be of no avail if I did not perfect the mantra or incantation for releasing them on the battlefield. And in fact, those of you who know the Mahabharata epic, Karna, the great warrior, at the moment that he most needed his celestial weapons, he couldn't remember the mantra or incantation for releasing them. So, to perfect the mantra of these arrows, which vanquish ignorance, I needed to embody them in my life. And of course, this is the hardest thing to do. Without it, all the wisdom verses in our possession will be of no avail when we need them most. So I would be vanquished by fear, confusion, and lamentation. And then a few days later, as if to confirm the teaching that my teacher imparted to us, I came upon the following verse in a text, a Dharma text for training young princes. I won't recite the Sanskrit, but the English meaning of this verse is, just as a lamp in the hand of a blind man cannot help him see, so the instructions of the sacred texts yield no fruit for those who do not act on them with determination. This exchange with my teacher is especially meaningful for me because it was the last direct teaching that my teacher gave before he left this world the following year. So this is the topic we'll be looking at today, and in relation to these two verses of chapter 2. So in the age-old tradition of ancient India, I'll begin with a Mangala Charanam, an auspicious invocation. Ajnanatirandasya Jnananjana Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. He Shri Guru Jnanadadina Bandho Svananda Data Karunaika Sindho Brindavanasi Nahitavatara Prasiddha Radha Pranaya Prachara. So we turn now to the 52nd verse of chapter 2. And as Atul Krishnadas explained, the warrior Arjuna has fallen into an existential crisis, a dark night of the soul, in between two great armies, right at the outset, the onset of war. And Krishna begins by sharing the teachings of Sankhya and Vedanta, so the teachings of the ancient Upanishads on the nature of the unchanging self, which is different, distinct from the changing physical body and the mind, and different from the central character in our small human story. And then Krishna turns to karma yoga, the yoga of skillful action. And he differentiates between acting with attachment, like Duryodhana, and acting without attachment as an offering to the soul of the universe, as an offering to Sri Krishna. And that is the way that Arjuna will engage with both Duryodhana and Arjuna will be performing the same action as warriors on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. But the difference between them in their state of awareness and in their motive and is the difference between night and day. So, text 52. Yadate mohakalelam buddhir vyatitarishyati tadagantasi nirvedam shrutavyasya shrutasya cha. When your intelligence has passed out of the dense forest of delusion, you shall become indifferent to all that has been heard and all that is to be heard. What a poetic verse. Shrotavyasya, of what is to be heard, and shrutasya, of what has been heard. So Krishna is telling Arjuna here that once his intellect rises above delusion, and he uses the poetic phrase moha kalilam, so the tangle or dense confusion of moha, of delusion. So once the intellect rises above that and perceives reality as it is, then Krishna says Arjuna will naturally become detached from all worldly things and even from Vedic injunctions meant for those who are still bound by dualities. So this verse makes a transition towards spiritual insight that is direct and experiential, beyond mere study or book knowledge, and even, eventually even beyond the gunas, also beyond the qualities that make up this the field of perception. So we move now to the next verse, which is verse 53. Shruti vipratipannate yadastasyati nischala samadhavachala buddhis tada yogam avapsyasi. When your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, and when it remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, then you will have attained the divine consciousness. You'll see, those of you who are interested in the Sanskrit, that this has the language of yoga in it. So you have samadho in the locative, so in perfect absorption, in samadhi. And then yogam avapsyasi, you will attain yoga. In other words, when one's understanding is no longer confused by anything in this world and stands firm and unwavering in samadhi, in absorption, then you will attain yoga. Krishna's telling Arjuna. Now, Sanskrit is an incredible language because sometimes there are different possible meanings, and our commentators explain the various ways in which the words can be understood, in which the words can be taken apart or understood. And sometimes that yields different types or different levels of insight. So one commentator in our bhakti tradition is Baladev Vidyabhushan. So Sri Baladev explains that the word vipratipanna doesn't necessarily have to mean disturbed or confused. It also can have a different meaning. Vi can mean thoroughly or completely, and pratipanna can refer to advancing forward or reaching a goal. So it can mean thoroughly advanced or fully attained. So here Baladev Vidyabhushan Prabhu is explaining that one meaning of this verse is that someone who truly understands the Upanishadic teachings on the nature of the self and the supreme self, they are the ones who cross beyond, the realm of illusion, and their intellect is fixed in samadhi, like unwavering, like a flame in a windless place. So if you have like a candle in a place that has no moving air, no wind, it just remains steady, unwavering. In other words, the Upanishads, they are the ultimate purifier and perfecter of understanding. Baladev Vidyabhushan Prabhu is explaining. But he also explains that what does that mean? Understanding the Upanishads means being able to attain the awareness that the Upanishads directly describe. So there are a few teachings here, how to understand these verses. One of them is no longer being enamored by ordinary worldly pursuits. So when we progress on the journey of the self, the journey of the soul, Atmagati, then we begin to see the world as it is. And the ephemeral things of this world no longer have the same attraction or hold on us. And that's especially so when we develop some awareness of the self and, of course, the supreme self. So the things of this world which are praised and coveted in literature and in art, they look more like colorful shards of glass on the beach. I remember as a young boy, I would go to the beach and look for interesting stones, interesting pebbles. And sometimes when the pebbles were immersed in salty water, they looked particularly attractive. Their colors kind of came out. And then as soon as the water dried, they looked very ordinary. And sometimes I would find something glistening in the distance, and it looked like a gemstone. And I would go there, and you would find it was just a piece of green or red glass. In the end, pieces of glass only end up cutting you, and they don't have any true value. So in the same way, the things of this world, they take on immense significance, and we may spend an entire life pursuing them. Various ideas of what it means to be successful. And we try to use these things that we covet, we try to use them we look for our identity in them. But at the end of life, all of that remains, it can't help us, and we're not able to take it with us. So this is what Krishna is explaining. You'll become indifferent to all that has been heard and all that is to be heard. Now, this takes us to the second level of meaning here, which is that the Vedas, that will move beyond the worldly or temporary concerns within the Vedas. So the Vedas have different levels of teachings, and the Upanishads teach about the nature of the self and the supreme self. But a lot of the teachings of the Vedas are about seeking benefits in this life and in the next one. So various types of rituals, customs, meritorious deeds, spells, incantations. In the Vedas, you find incantations for magical incantations, both to help cure someone as well as to defeat someone who's perceived as an enemy or an opponent. You find all kinds of things in the great body of literature known as the Vedas. So Krishna is explaining here that when one's intelligence becomes undisturbed or just disinterested in the various teachings that relate to, that are still contained within the field of perception, that relate to the gunas, so that are directed at the temporary benefits in this flickering world. And then one's intelligence becomes like a flame in a windless place. And then the practitioner attains yoga, which is characterized by direct awareness of the self. So this is what Baladev Vidyabhushan Prabhu explains Krishna is telling Arjuna in these two verses. And then another dimension here is that dimension of direct perception or awareness. And this is what I want to focus on a little bit here. So the Upanishads explain that mere book knowledge, they describe it as mere weariness of the tongue. So what we have here is verses that explain a transition towards spiritual insight that is direct, experiential, and beyond mere kind of memorization or intellectual retention. I can memorize all the verses of the Gita, but it won't do me any good if it remains on the level of book knowledge. And it hasn't changed the way that I live my life. It hasn't changed the way that I engage with life, my thoughts, my words, my actions. And of course, as we've discussed in previous episodes, it's easy to be kind of wise when life is running smoothly without any challenges. And it's in the face of serious challenges, difficulties in our everyday life that upend our world, that we can get a measure for how much, to what extent we have embodied the yoga teachings of the Bhagavad Gita or not. So it's an opportunity for us to deepen our yoga practice and also to get to have a sense of where we are, our own level in the practice of yoga. In the dark night of the soul, as we've discussed previously, everything Arjuna has learned previously is unable to help him. And so he turns to Krishna. We'll see that in chapter 13. He'll turn to Krishna and he'll say, Krishna, tell me, what is knowledge? Because I learned so much and it hasn't been able to help me through this difficult episode in life. And Krishna's reply is surprising. Krishna says, Amanitvam, Adambitvam, Ahimsa Kshantir Arjavam, Acharyo Pasanam Shocham, Stairyam Atma Vinigraha. And then a few more verses. And then he finishes by saying, Etaj Jnana Miti Proktam Ajnanam Yad Atunyata. Absence of pride, absence of deceit, not harming, patience, honesty, service to the teacher, purity, tranquility, self-control, and so on. This is declared to be jnana, or knowledge. Whatever is contrary to this is ajnana, the absence of knowledge. So you note that this is a definition Krishna is giving of knowledge, and it's a methodological definition. So if a goal or a result is defined in terms of its means, it focuses attention on the work that needs to be done to achieve that goal or result. So the definition serves as a reflexive model for self-assessment and self-monitoring. To what extent do we have knowledge? Well, in times of difficulty, or in times of not just difficulty, in times of even more difficult, in times of good fortune, do we become proud, or do we possess amanitvam, absence of pride? In various circumstances in life, will we harm others? Will we harm ourselves? Patience in times of difficulty, do we have patience? Or in our practice, do we have patience or not? So we can understand the extent to which we have evolved in our practice of yoga by looking at a definition such as this one, which Krishna gives to Arjuna, and seeing whether we embody that in our own life. It's interesting because we actually, speaking about information and personal transformation, we live in an age of information. But despite the information we might have or access to vast amounts of information, are we actually truly wise? We call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, human the extremely wise. So that's the name we've given to our species. Actually, interestingly, Homo derives from the Indo-European root for earth. So it actually means earthling. So, but we usually translate it as man or human. And sapiens means wise or knowing. So we call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens. Um, not just wise human, but wise human. Today we have more access to information than ever before. But it struck me, even as a young boy, that we're still far from wise. The name we've given humankind is more of an aspiration, an aim. And given the destruction of our planet and our capacity for greed, suffering, and irrational delusions, we might perhaps more truthfully have named our species Homo avarus, human the greedy, or Homo vastans, human the destroyer, or even Homo patiens, suffering human. So we can know so much, but we need to ask ourselves, as practitioners, has it changed? Has it transformed the way that we live? So I can be on a bicycle. My act of steering, if I'm on a bicycle, has no meaning or purpose unless I'm moving forward. So we call this in Sanskrit discipline, or tapas. Tapas literally means heat. Imagine I'm cooking something. So I don't know what's the simplest thing to cook. Maybe rice, right? Rice or pasta. The easiest thing to cook. You don't need very much. So you need your water, you need your pot, you need some salt, and so on. You need your rice if it's rice that you're making. You can have all of that ready. But if you're missing one thing, you can't succeed, and that is heat. Heat or tapas converts into tejas, which is potency. So we see that, for example, an athlete who's enters into a period of intense training, and when they emerge from that, you see that there's like they have an effulgence, they have like a potency that comes from that period of intense training. So of course, tapas doesn't mean doing something against ourselves or harming ourselves. It means living optimally and doing working towards realizing our full potential, controlling the mind, focusing the mind and senses towards a particular goal, the goal of our spiritual practice. So going back to the analogy of or the example of an athlete will care about her health, will not sleep too much or sleep too little, will not overtrain, and will not harm herself, hopefully. So it really means this is really about living the best life we can without being distracted or overpowered by our mind and senses. And that's why Krishna, in the verses previously and also in some of the verses that follow, Krishna focuses a little bit in his teachings on the importance of controlling the mind. The mind can be our best friend. We sometimes speak of the monkey mind as well. The mind can be our greatest opponent as well. And I think we've all, as human beings, have all had experience of both of those. So we'll stop here for today. I did have an exercise for you, but we are out of time. I will save that for the next session. Thank you very much. Atul Krishnadas, you might be on mute. I don't know, but I'm not able to hear you.